Let's talk about self-love. I feel like it's a term that's been so overused by the Instagram influencer, self-development people that it's sort of lost all of its meaning, that it's just been vaguely thrown around and become so vague that we don't have any real understanding of what that actually means. Like, what does it actually mean to love yourself? Like, what the fuck? Like, oh, you should love yourself. Oh, you should love yourself. Like, have a self-love day. And it's like, well, what the fuck does that actually mean? Yet so many of us are walking around trying a little bit to flee from who we are, trying to push down the uncomfortable parts of ourselves that we're not really content with, that we are finding it really, really hard to accept exists. I had a friend, and I think this is a great example of what I think self-love is really about. In my mind, self-love could easily be replaced by the term self-acceptance. Because what is love if it's not the act of accepting something? How can I love myself if I'm unwilling to accept myself? If we have someone dear in our life that we say that we love, yet we resent them for who they are, we are unwilling to accept all their parts, then we're not really loving them. If I'm willing to accept you as who you are in this moment, then that's true love. If we're talking about like unconditional love, like we imagine God would love us in an unconditional way, what would that mean? Well, that would mean quite simply He would accept us as we are regardless of what we've done or who we are. He would have unconditional acceptance. And so when it comes to self-love, what does that mean? Well, in my mind it's very easily explained that it means self-acceptance. And so what does self-acceptance mean? Well, it means that in the times where you are showing up in ways that you might not want to show up. For an example, let's say that I'm super socially awkward and I'll be in interactions with people where that awkwardness will come to display. For the times that's happened to me where I feel very awkward in a conversation or something, I would be very annoyed at myself after, and you might be able to relate to this. I would go after and I'll be like, oh, why did I say that stupid thing? Or why do I get so awkward? Why can't I just be like cool? And that's exactly the opposite of self-love. Exactly the opposite of self-acceptance as well. Because what would it look like if in that situation I could simply accept the fact that I was awkward? I could simply accept the fact that I wasn't perfect and I was okay with that. Not expecting myself to be perfect, or rather not having to be perfect to feel okay about being who I am. Not having to feel shameful around who I am. And I think shame is very, very interesting to talk about, because when I'm looking and trying to understand where addictions come from, I think shame is an immense fuel for addiction. I had a friend who suffered severely from porn addiction, and I was talking with him somehow. I think I got connected with him through a group of guys that wanted to leave porn out of their lives. They didn't want to have that as part of their life. They wanted to leave it. They wanted to stop jerking off to porn and all of that stuff. And we talked about the addiction to porn that many guys are suffering from. And he reached out to me recently and he expressed this frustration to me that, one, he had an immense desire to stop watching porn for good, to stop jerking off to porn. And two, he could not stop for the life of him. And then three, because he couldn't stop and because he had this desire to stop and he failed to meet that desire, he had an immense amount of shame and guilt around the fact that he kept watching porn. And it was so interesting for me to look at the fact that he was watching it and was resentful towards himself for watching it. And it became very, very obvious that the fact that he was so resentful towards himself and so shameful was somehow fueling into his desire to keep watching it. There's the phrase that where attention goes, energy flows. What it really means is that what we're putting all our attention into, we're feeding that thing with our energy. And so by having a desire to stop watching porn and to consciously keep thinking about the desire, like, oh, I don't want to watch porn, I don't want to watch porn, and sort of having this like, oh, porn is bad, it's feeding the idea of porn so much energy that it consumes so much of the mental awareness that it becomes extremely hard to leave that porn. If we draw an example or relate it to the other situation where we might be in a social situation where we feel awkward, and we become so obsessed with, oh, I must not feel awkward, that ironically, when we're in the next social interaction, we become so self-conscious about it, we become so aware of it, we feed so much energy into it that it becomes impossible for us in that interaction to actually be relaxed and behave normally. And so because we've been stifling ourselves so much mentally by overthinking into it, by overfeeding our fear with all of our energy, with all of our attention, that fear is stifling us down and making us cripple, making us awkward, so that the next interaction, if there's one thing we're guaranteed, it is that we're gonna be awkward. Because now we've been feeding our fear of being just that so immensely that it's consuming us. And the same with the porn addiction. We're so focused on the porn that we keep thinking about porn, and when we keep thinking about it, it starts taking up mental space and it becomes consuming. It indulges us. It's so hard not to feed into it because it's so heavy on our minds that if we could just relax, we would simply let it go. But because we're so tense from focusing so intensely on it, by resenting it so much that it has so much of our energy, it becomes a huge part of our mental thought pattern that is like impossible not to give into it because we're obsessing over it. And then on the other hand, my belief is, and what I've seen from my own experience, if my friend would simply accept the fact that, okay, I watch porn, okay, I'm not gonna feed into resenting myself, feed into the shame that I have around porn. I'm simply gonna accept I watch porn. It's already done. And overthinking about it, over resenting ourselves about it, does nothing good. If we can simply accept the fact that that was what happened in the moment and not feed into the idea of, oh, this is my identity now. We get so caught up in, as human beings, so caught up in who am I? And we think that the small stuff that happens in our life, our thoughts, our desires, are our identity. But quite frankly, we are human beings who have a lot of different weird thoughts, a lot of weird different desires, that if we start identifying with them, they start weighting us down. And we start expecting ourselves to be someone that we're not. It starts weighting us down. But if we can simply accept, okay, I'm a human being. I'm a human fucking being. I'm not supposed to be perfect. Like, that's not part of the role that we get when we're given this life as human beings. Part of that description is not being perfect. Quite on the contrary, it's having emotions, having desires, having thoughts, having random things come up in our mind. That's part of the description of being a fucking human being. And so can we accept that and look at ourselves and say, okay, I'm a human being. I do weird stuff. I'm awkward sometimes. Sometimes I have desires that I'd rather not feed into and I'd rather not have, but I have them, okay. And just accept that without having to put all this extra weight onto it. Can we just accept it and then let it go? Just accept it and then let it go. And so the few times where my friend might slip up and watch porn, okay, it happened. Now let it go. Now let it go. And practice this letting go instead of holding on to it. Instead of holding on to things, stacking them up inside and letting them weigh us down. Carrying them with us around in our daily life, so that when we meet a new person, we're not just Valdemar, we're Valdemar who's the person that watches porn even though he shouldn't. Valdemar that's awkward in social interactions, and suddenly we have this huge fucking burden that we put on ourselves from over-identifying with all the small stuff that is not really the essence of who we are, but all the small stuff that simply comes with being human beings. Can we let them go and not put them on us and not use them as reason to make ourselves feel even more shameful, even more guilty? Instead, know that if we want to self-love, then we have to start accepting who we are. Have to start accepting that we are flawed and be willing to say, okay, I might have messed up. Now I know. And just let it go. Simply let it go. Similarly, I wouldn't, if I had a friend and he told me, I watch porn even though I shouldn't have, I wouldn't hate on him for doing that. I would be like, okay, yeah, I get it. It's sometimes you have a desire and it overweights you and you give in. all good, man, you're okay. Wouldn't I accept him instead of telling him, oh, you're a shitty person now, now you're a porn addict? Instead of identifying as the role as a porn addict, wouldn't I just accept him and say, yeah, it's all good, man, don't be so hard on yourself? And can we do that to ourselves instead of having to do the opposite? If we look at our self-talk, if someone else were saying that to you, how would you feel about that person? Probably you would say, if someone else were saying what you're saying to yourself, you would be pretty resentful towards that person for talking so shitty about you. Yet we indulge in doing that to ourselves on a daily fucking basis, on an hourly basis. So what would it look like if we gave that up? If we said, okay, now I'm gonna try to be nice to myself. I'm gonna try to remind myself that when I slip up, that it's okay and that I can still accept myself. One time I did a Facebook Live when I just started making videos. I thought, okay, I'm gonna put my message out there. And this woman, she invited me to come on a shared Facebook Live where we would talk about the journey into self-development and these kind of things. And I thought, okay, you know what? I'm gonna broadcast it to all my friends, but that's okay. So when we started doing it, I started talking about sexual addictions. I started talking about craving and needing the validation of women. And suddenly I saw that all my old Tinder dates, they started jumping in on the call, watching it live as I was talking about my addiction to female validation. I felt so fucking awkward after. I feel like I couldn't go out on the street because I knew people would look at me and they would see like, oh, what the fuck is going on with Valdemar? What the fuck is wrong with him with all the stuff he talked about? And I thought, oh, all the judgment from people. And then I went out to my bathroom mirror and I looked myself in the mirror because I knew that this was something that I have been wanting to do. And I knew that instinctively, I thought that being as transparent, as honest, as truthful, as vulnerable as I had been on that live, sharing all my dirty, nasty secrets with everyone that I knew that that was actually something that I deeply, deeply honored. Yet I still felt embarrassed about myself. So I looked myself in the mirror and I was standing there and I said, I'm so fucking proud of you for doing that. I'm unbelievably proud of you, Valdemar. And as I was saying that, tears started trickling down my cheeks because I was like really feeling it. And suddenly it changed from me being embarrassed about it to being something that really, really fueled me with self-confidence for daring to take that leap. And so if we can remind ourselves on a daily basis to, instead of judging ourselves, remind ourselves that it's okay to slip up. It's okay to not be perfect. Matter of fact, we shouldn't strive to being perfect because we're gonna give up on being sincere, on being real if we're going for perfect. Much rather to be real in this world. And that's all I had for you today. Please let me know in the comments if this message hit home for you. Feel free to share a story about yourself, about a time where you were honest, vulnerable, or a time where you actually chose to love yourself. Thank you for watching, and if you liked the video, please do subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.